Key literary terms: protagonist and antagonist. The main character in a literary work is the protagonist, and his or her adversary or enemy, if there is one, is the antagonist. There must be a protagonist within a story, but it's not required that there be an antagonist. Most plots center upon a conflict or multiple conflicts. The protagonists are set against other people or society, against fate, circumstance, or the environment, or against their own desires or values, or any combination of these. Point of view. Point of view is the perspective from which a narrative is presented. It is similar to the point of view from which the camera sees the action in a film. The two main points of view are third-person narrator and first-person narrator. A third-person narrator stands outside the story itself. This narrator will use third-person pronouns such as he, she, and they. A first-person narrator participates in the story. This narrator will use the first person, I. The all-knowing third-person narrator, known as omniscient, may choose to guide the reader's understanding of characters and the significance of their story. This type of character may be intrusive, commenting and evaluating, or unobtrusive, describing without much commentary. The first-person narrator is a character within the story and therefore limited in understanding. He or she might be an observer who happens to see the events of the story. We'll see this in Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness. Or play a minor role in the action. An example of this would be in Herman Melville's novel, Moby Dick. Or they might be a protagonist, and we'll see that in many of our stories, including Tony Cade Bambaro's The Lesson. Plot. There are four major elements of plot. The first is exposition. This is the part of the story in which the setting and the characters are introduced. The second element is rising action. This is the part of the story where the conflict is introduced, developed, and ultimately brought to a climax. The third element, climax, is the point at which the conflict is brought to a crisis stage. And then lastly, resolution or denouement. This is where the conflict is resolved in some manner. The resolution often involves a reversal of intention whereby the protagonist's intended outcome is reversed for better or worse. And this reversal often depends on a recognition or discovery which radically changes the protagonist's understanding of his or her circumstances. It's possible in some stories to have more than one plot line. In double plots, a secondary story, the subplot, parallels the main one. Either as an analogy, the subplot is like a smaller scale version of the main plot, or as a contrast with the main story, like a comic subplot to an otherwise serious story. Setting. Setting is the time period and place where the story occurs. All stories will have a setting, and sometimes they may have multiple settings. Characterization. Characterization is the manner in which an author creates an impression and gives background information about characters so that we get to know these characters. Sometimes the author may have the character say or do unpleasant things so that we will dislike this character. It's important to recognize that authors try to manipulate us as the readers to think and feel certain ways about the characters. Paying attention to how the writer is manipulating our thoughts or feelings, in other words, how they're using characterization, is a sophisticated analytical skill. Symbol. A symbol is something that on the surface is its literal self, but which also has another meaning or even several meanings. For example, a sword may just be a sword, or could also be a symbol of justice. A symbol may be said to embody an idea. There are two common types of symbols. Universal symbols that embody universally recognized meanings wherever used, such as light to symbolize knowledge, or a skull to symbolize death. The second type of symbol is a constructed symbol. These are given symbolic meaning by the way an author uses them in a literary work. An example of this would be seen in Herman Melville's Moby Dick. The white whale becomes seen possibly as a symbol of evil. Irony. Irony is a mode of expression through words, verbal irony, or events, irony of situation, conveying a reality different from and usually opposite to appearance or expectation. A writer may say the opposite of what he or she means, create a reversal between expectation and its fulfillment, or give the audience knowledge that a character lacks, making the character's words have meaning to the audience not perceived by the character. In verbal irony, the writer's meaning or even his attitude may be different from what he or she actually says. An example of situational irony would occur if a professional pickpocket had his own pocket picked just as he was in the act of picking someone else's pocket. The irony is generated by the surprise recognition by the audience of a reality in contrast with the expectation or appearance. The surprise recognition by the audience often produces a comic effect, making irony often funny. Satire. Satire is a literary mode based on criticism of people and society through ridicule. The satirist aims to reduce the practices attacked by laughing scornfully at them, and being witty enough to allow the reader to laugh also. Ridicule, irony, exaggeration, and several other techniques are almost always present in satire. The satirist may insert serious statements of value or desired behavior, but most often he or she relies on an implicit moral code understood by the audience. The satirist's goal is to point out the hypocrisy of his target and hope that either the target or the audience will return to a real following of the code. Thus, satire is inescapably moral, even when no explicit values are promoted within the work, for the satirist works within the framework of a widely spread value system. Tone. Tone is the writer's attitude towards his readers and his subject, his mood or moral view. A writer can be formal, informal, playful, ironic, and especially optimistic or pessimistic.